Happy Friday, my magnificent ones. Sue Paulson, your magnificence mentor here, back with another episode of Tea with Sue. This is episode number 55. The focus today is about assumptions, and I decided to make my title How Assumptions Cause Stress, because they can and they do. So let's think about assumptions for a moment. You might remember that old breaking down of the word assume, where it can make an ass out of you or me. So when we assume about an event or another person's thoughts or circumstances or whatever, when we believe it to be a certain way and we're wrong, then there's a problem. So assumptions can get us into a lot of hot water. So where do assumptions come from? How do they get created in the first place? What leads us to believe certain things? Well, there's a variety of ways that we can make assumptions. We can make assumptions based on our observations of how the world works or how different people work or interact. We can base it on our experience. Well, this is how it worked for me 10 years ago, so I'm assuming it will work today. Big trap. We can also have assumptions based on old programs and old beliefs. So you know as well as I do that our heads were filled with a myriad of programs that were designed to keep us safe, to make us focus in a certain way, to act in a certain way, to speak in a certain way, on and on and on. And our heads were filled from all the authority figures in our lives, whether it was parents or siblings or school teachers or medical professionals. I mean, everybody can weigh in on that. Anybody who's in authority when we're little and we don't really know how to think for ourselves that well, then we're like sponges. So we take in all kinds of information, but because our processing ability isn't that strong, we have a really interesting and in certain ways a well-developed intuition, but our ability to think things through just isn't there. And in fact, it isn't really there in full force until well into our 20s. So when you think about it, we ask our young people to make really important decisions in their lives way too soon, way before they have the ability to really process things in a solid way for them. So that's where assumptions can come from. And sometimes we assume something and it's true and there's no problem. But how does it cause stress? Well, usually it causes stress in relation to something else or someone else, because we'll make an assumption about a certain way of being or a certain way of thinking. So let me give you an example here. So I had the assumption that when I was married, that when we shared a bank account and there was money in the bank, and as far as I knew, everybody else was looked after because nobody told me that they needed anything, that the money was available for me to spend. So I went out and bought myself some new clothes. Well, I couldn't quite understand why my husband at the time was less than thrilled because I had spent this money. He didn't seem too interested in my new look or whatever. And I thought, well, come, he seems kind of upset. I wonder why. Well, then he comes forward and he says, you know, I was pretty upset when you went out and spent that money on those clothes. And I said, well, why? to help me understand why you're upset about it. Did you not want me to have new clothes? And he says, no, 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 that's not it at all. But I had in my mind, because I need a new suit, that I would take that money and spend it on a new suit. And I said, well, I didn't know that. I didn't know you wanted to spend money on a new suit. You never said anything. And we tracked it back because I thought there's something more going on here. And what I came to understand was that he didn't tell me that he was really wanting a new suit, because his old programming was such that the man looks after and sacrifices for the family to the point where if there's anything left over, then he can weigh in and get what he needs, but not until everybody else's needs are looked after. So he just assumed that if the money got spent on everybody else's needs and there was nothing left for him, oh, well, that's the way it was. Did it cause some resentment? You bet it did on his part. He resented it, but that was the way he was brought up. So he was kind of resigned to that. So when I realized this, and because my way of being in that regard was, well, people will tell me if they need something. And so if they don't tell me that they need something, then I guess they don't need anything and I can please myself. So that got us into a little bit of hot water and caused a great deal of stress. So we had to have a crucial conversation about that. So what we did, we had an agreement after that I would ask him, and I would make sure that if there was something on his mind that he wanted, that he was included in the three of us, because to me, it was not about our son and I got everything before he got anything. That was not going to be the way it was going to be. I wanted this to be as equal. And if one had more need than the others at the time, then they got looked after. So we worked through that, but oh boy, it was tense for a little while until we came to that understanding. So there was a clear case of old programming just setting in so hard that it created a situation that didn't need to be created, but because we each assumed certain things, then there was a problem. So we want to look at where our assumptions come from. Sometimes our assumptions come from our own desire to do things in a certain way that we do so often, and it works for us so well that we come to believe that that's the only way it can be done. So I'm right in the way I do it. You're wrong if you don't do it my way. So then the judgment creeps in, right? And so rather than saying, oh, you do that a different way, oh, that's interesting, then it's not about judging. It's about saying, and of course, the second that we make the other person wrong, then the gloves come off, right? We're ready to do battle because, well, I'm right. And then all it becomes about is proving that the other person is wrong and we're right. Well, is that stressful? Yeah, I think so. I've certainly experienced that, and it just doesn't work. Rather than saying, oh, well, how do you do that? And why do you do it that way? Well, that's the way I was taught, and I don't know any other way. Oh, well, this is the way I was taught. And so then each person demonstrates what a different way might be. And maybe between those two ways, they'll come up with a new way that works even better. Who knows? So, but it's that reluctance that we have to actually speak up about this. So one of the reasons that assumptions can get us into a lot of hot water and cause a great deal of stress is because we're reluctant to speak up. We're fearful of what might happen if we say what we know or share what's important to us or voice a different opinion. because we're fearful that it's going to cause a ruckus. It's going to cause a battle of some sort. And I don't know about you, but I'm not a confrontive kind of person. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't want to make anybody's life miserable. And so my MO is to kind of step back and say, least said, soonest mended. But it doesn't always work that way, because if somebody doesn't speak up, then you can't fix what's not working. So I've seen this in corporate boardrooms, for example, and particularly when an organization is going through a great deal of change. So maybe it's the CEO who's proposing a radical shift in the way business is done. And the thing's well presented and everything comes forward. And then at the end, then of course, there's the typical question. Does anybody have any questions, any comments, any objections? And they put it out to the group. What typically happens? Does anybody say anything? Well, one or two might say, oh yeah, great idea, boss. But chances are the quietest ones, the shyest ones, or the ones that really need time to think it through, the ones that are thinking, there might be a few flaws here, and I'm not sure this is going to work quite the way they think it's going to work, they hold back. They don't say anything. So then the assumption on the part of the leader is that, well, all must be well because nobody said anything. So we're going to carry forward and implement the changes. Then it's a big shock when they realize that people are kicking and screaming all the way to whatever changes have been recommended and then seemingly adopted. And nobody's prepared for that. And they go, what? Well, nobody said anything. Yeah, but I needed time to think about it. So this is another time when not only is active listening important in this whole thing, like, so give me some sense of what you think and why you think that way. You create a culture in your organization that's open to feedback. And there's a variety of ways you can do that to encourage people to talk, to encourage people to send in ideas and so on, and even anonymously, so that at least voices are heard. And then, of course, be open to entertaining what might work even better, or the idea of why it wouldn't work, because all of us have what I would call tunnel vision. So when we look at something from our own point of view, which usually is this path, but then there's somebody else looking at it from this path, and somebody else looking at it from this path, and then somebody who's 10 stories up sees a whole bunch of paths. Well, in there is the best of what's going to work if it's allowed. But if we assume, well, it's my way or the highway, or nobody can do it better than the way I've thought of it, then you set yourself up for a great deal of commotion around that. So it plays out with our kids, it plays out with our parents. Oh, does it ever play out with our parents? And of course, when we get involved with intimate relationships, be they friends or closer than that, oh, it's a big thing, and it can cause us so much stress until it's resolved, until we get through it. So one of the biggest antidotes, of course, is communication, is to get into the role of I guess the posture is one of openness to start with, where your curiosity is high. This is my idea about this. What's your idea? Or how do you think about that? And is it different from the way I think? We've had the battle of the sexes going on for eons now, simply because men and women think differently. Our brains are wired differently. There's a very cool, I think it might be a YouTube video where this scientist demonstrates the physically what women's brains look like in contrast to men's brains. It's so funny to watch. And when I watched it, it's exactly right. Women's brains are just, the wires are going all over the place, and it's a convoluted, it looks like a mess to me. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's kind of what feels like goes on in my mind a lot of the time. Whereas men tend to be very singularly focused, and it's like a rifle shot as opposed to a shotgun. And so they don't consider all the parameters and all of the ins and outs and so on. And I remember Alison Armstrong listening to her talk about men, and she said women tend to assume that men are like women, only they're behaving badly. And I started to laugh at that, because she said, you can't assume that. You can't assume that men think like women, because they don't. And of course, marketers have known this for a long time, because the women's lingerie department is on maybe the second or third floor of the department store, way at the back, through a variety of other little kiosks and types of goods for sale. And the men's department usually is closest to the main entrance, because men want to just get in, buy what they want to buy, and get out, if they go clothing shopping at all. And whereas women will, kind of forage through the different floors and see what's on sale, and look at bargains, and then make their decisions based on cruising around. And they'll spend time just shopping. They may not even buy anything, but they go to look around. That's not the way men do it. And you know this. And so that's why you see men sitting on the bench in the mall aisle while their women are off. You go, honey, I'll wait for you here. And they're loaded down with the packages. Well, we're different. And so we don't want to assume that the guy understands, just because we married this wonderful individual, that they understand what's going on inside of us. The only way they're going to understand is if you share that. And now they may never behave as you do, because they're different, but you can honor the way they behave just as you want them to honor the way you behave. Will it make sense to either one? Not necessarily. It might not make any sense, but it is the way it is. And so there comes to be an acceptance of, oh, well, that's just the way her brain works, and that's just the way his brain works, and he does that because of this, and I do that because of that. And we come to some kind of common ground in all of that. And that's what we're really looking for. The challenge is when we let judgment of each other's way of being and way of doing rule, because then we're back into the soup of, well, he shouldn't do it that way, and why is she doing it that way? And oh boy, stressful. Yep, it's stressful. So I really want to encourage you today to take a look at where your assumptions are coming from. And if that assumption is flat out wrong, then it's time to do something about that. Is there an old program that you need to re-examine and change because it's no longer working for you? Maybe it did for the first 10 years of your life, and then it's been pretty useless ever since then, and it's time to get rid of it. And I know I was brought up with Don't Talk to Strangers program. And of course, it was designed when I was little to keep me safe. But as I got older and it was important for me to get out into the community and talk about the work I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it, if I couldn't talk to strangers, I was hooped. There was nothing I could do so it was hard. And I was scared because, whoa, what if that stranger is a bad person? And sometimes for people, the assumption is, well, it's a stranger, therefore they must be a bad person. They don't look like me, therefore there's something wrong with them, or they might be dangerous, when nothing could be further from the truth. So we want to examine some of those old beliefs, some of those old programs, and when we're in that position of assuming something, it's good to stop and ask yourself, is the assumption I'm making valid? Or do I need to check? Or do I need to check my assumption and say, are you thinking the same way I'm thinking? Or are you feeling the same way I'm feeling in this situation? Ask, talk to other people, and don't just text, because texting cannot communicate feelings and ideas. And I've known lots of people get into big trouble because they won't either pick up the phone or meet with a person face to face and find out what's really going on, getting into the heart stuff, because that's where all the magic happens, is when we speak from the heart and own our truth. It's easier for the other person to open up and do the same. But electronically, that's a lot tougher. So face to face, whenever you can, is a very good way of doing that. You know you can do this. You know you can clean up your communication and stop assuming, because you're that magnificent. So give it a shot and feel free to leave a comment and let me know how it works for you. If you're enjoying Tea with Sue, please subscribe to my channel. You're welcome to share this video with anyone you think it might be useful for. And of course, you can always get way more Tea with Sue from my app, The Magnificence Mentor. In the meantime, I wish you a stress-free weekend filled with laughter and joy and lots of fun. See you next week.